Good evening, and welcome to the 26th installment of my reading of S. Morgenstern's classic, The Princess Bride. Tonight, we're going to hear Wesley's story after he was clubbed into unconsciousness by Count Rugen. And here we go. Wesley awoke, chained in a giant cage. His shoulder was beginning to fester from the gnawing and digging that the RUS had done into his flesh. He ignored this discomfort momentarily to try and adjust to his surroundings. He was certainly underground. It was not the lack of windows that made that sure, more the dankness. From somewhere above him now, he could hear animal sounds, an occasional lion roar, the yelp of a cheetah. Shortly after his return to consciousness, the albino appeared, bloodless, with skin as pale as dying birch. Kind of like those trees back there. The candlelight that served to illuminate the cage made the albino seem totally like a creature who had never seen the sun. The albino held a tray which carried many things, bandages and food, healing powders and brandy. "Where are we?" from Wesley. A shrug from the albino. "Who are you?" That was almost the entire extent of the fellow's conversation. Wesley asked question after question while the albino tended and redressed his wound, then fed him food that was warm and surprisingly good and tasteful, and plentiful. "Who knows I'm here?" "Lie, but tell me something. Give me an answer. Who knows I'm here?" "I know." "They know." "They?" "The prince and the count, you mean?" "And that is all." "When I was brought in, I was half conscious. The count was giving the orders, but 3 soldiers were carrying me. They know too." "Knew." "They're dead? Is that what you're saying?" "Am I to die then?" Wesley lay back on the floor of the giant underground cage, watching as the albino silently reloaded the tray, glided from sight. If the soldiers were dead, surely it was not unreasonable to assume that he would eventually follow. But if they wanted his erasure, surely it was also not unreasonable to assume that they had not the least intention of doing it immediately. Why else tend his wounds? Why return his strength with good warm food? No, his death would be a while yet. But in the meantime, considering the personalities of his captors, it was finally not unreasonable to assume that they would do their best to make Wesley suffer. Greatly. Wesley closed his eyes. There was pain coming, and he had to be ready for it. He had to prepare his brain. He had to get his mind controlled and safe from their efforts so that they would not break him. He would not let them break him. He would hold together against anything and all. If they only gave him sufficient time to make ready, he knew he could defeat pain. It turned out that they gave him sufficient time. It was months before the machine was even ready. But they broke him anyway. At the end of the 30th day of festivities, with 60 days more of partying to enjoy, Buttercup was genuinely concerned that she might lack the strength to endure. Smile, smile, hold hands, bow and thank, over and over. She was simply exhausted from 1 month. How was she to survive twice that? It turned out, because of the king's health, to be both easy and sad. For with 55 days to go, Lathuron began to weaken terribly. Prince Humperdinck ordered new doctors brought in. There was still that last miracle man alive, Max, but since they had fired him long before, bringing him back on the case now was simply not deemed very wise. If he was incompetent then, when Lotharon was only desperately ill, how could he suddenly be a cure-all now, with Lotharon dying? The new doctors all agreed on various tried-and-true medications, and within 48 hours of their coming on the case, the king was dead. The wedding date, of course, was unchanged. It wasn't every day that a country had a 500th anniversary, but all the festivities were either curtailed entirely or vastly cut down, and Prince Humperdinck became, 45 days before the wedding, King of Florin. And that changed everything, because before he had taken nothing but his hunting seriously, and now he had to learn everything, learn to run a country, and he buried himself in books and wise men, and how did you tax this, and when should you tax that, and foreign entanglements, and who could be trusted, and how far, and with what. And before her lovely eyes, Humperdinck changed from a man of fear and action to one of frenzied wisdom, because he had to get it all straight now before any other country dared interfere with the future of Florin. So the wedding, when it actually took place, was a tiny thing and brief, sandwiched in between a minister's meeting and a treasury crisis. And Buttercup spent her first afternoon as queen wandering around the castle, not knowing what in the world to do with herself. It wasn't until King Humperdinck walked out on the balcony with her to greet the gigantic throng that had spent the day in patient waiting that she realized it had happened. She was the queen, and her life, for whatever it was worth, belonged now to the people. They stood together on the castle balcony, accepting their cheers, the cries, the endless, thunderous hip-hips, until Buttercup said, "Please, may I walk once more among them?" And the king said with a nod that she might, and down she went again, as on the day of the wedding announcement, radiant and alone. And again the people swept apart to let her pass, weeping and cheering and bowing, and then one person booed. On the balcony, watching it all, Humperdinck reacted instantly, gesturing soldiers into the area where the sound had come from, dispatching more troops quickly down to surround the queen. And like clockwork, Buttercup was safe. The booer apprehended and led away. "Hold a moment," Buttercup said, still shaken by the unexpectedness of what had happened. The soldier who held the booer stopped. "Bring her to me," Buttercup said, and in a moment the booer was right there, eye to eye. It was an ancient woman, withered and bent, and Buttercup thought of all the faces that had gone by in her lifetime, but this one she could not remember. "Have we met?" the queen asked. The old one shook her head. "Then why? Why on this day? Why do you insult the queen?" "Because you are not worthy of your cheers," the old woman said, and suddenly she was yelling, "You had love in your hands, and you gave it up for gold." She turned to the crowd. "It is true what I tell you. There was love alongside her in the fire swamp, and she dropped it from her fingers like garbage, and that is what she is, the queen of garbage." "I had given my word to my prince," Buttercup began, but the old woman could not be quieted. "Ask her how she got through the fire swamp. Ask her if she did it alone. She threw love away to be the queen of grime, the queen of muck. I am old, and life means nothing to me, so I am the only person in all this crowd to dare tell the truth. And truth says, bow to the queen of feculence if you want to, but not I. Cheer the queen of slime, an hors d'oeuvre, if you want to, but not I. Rave over the beauty of the queen of cesspools, but not I. Not I." She was advancing on Buttercup now. "Take her away," Buttercup ordered. But the soldiers could not stop her, and the old woman kept coming on, her voice getting louder and louder and louder and louder and louder and louder, and Buttercup woke up screaming. She was in her bed, alone, safe. The wedding was still 60 days away, but her nightmares had begun. The next night, She dreamed of giving birth to their first child and... Okay, look. Interruption time. And hey, how about giving old Morgenstern credit for a major league fake out here? I mean, didn't you think, just for a while at least, that they were really married? I mean, I did. It's one of the biggest memories I have of my father reading this book to me. I had pneumonia, but I was a little better then and madly caught up in the book. And one thing you know when you're 10 is that no matter what, there's going to be a happy ending. The authors can sweat all they want trying to scare you, but you know, deep down in your heart, you know. You just have no doubt that in the long run, justice is going to win out. And Wesley and Buttercup, well, they had their troubles, sure, but they were going to get married and live happily ever after. I would have bet the family fortune. Now, not that I knew how much my dad made back then, but the hole in the floorboards of our 1981 Chevette, affectionately known as the Flintmobile, through which you could see the Lansing, Michigan roads rushing by, should have given me a hint that it wasn't much, but I would have bet the family fortune if I'd found a sucker big enough to take me on. Well, when my father got through with that sentence, where the wedding was sandwiched between the ministers' meeting and the treasury, whatever, I said, "Dad, you read that wrong." Now, my father's this ordained minister, and quite literate. Well, you just don't challenge a guy with a giant bookcase and has read the Bible through who knows how many times and say he's reading something incorrectly, because for a guy like that, that's really threatening. "I'm doing the reading," he said. "I know, but you got it wrong. She didn't marry Humperdinck. She marries Wesley." "It says right there," my father began, a little huffy, and he starts going over it again. "No, Dad, you must have skipped a page then. Something. Get it right, eh?" Now, by now, my dad was a little tiny bit upset. "I skipped nothing, Michael. I read the words. The words are there. I read them. Good night." And he went off to his study. Hey, please, no," I called after him, but he's a proud man, and the next thing you know, my mother came in saying, "Your father says his throat is too sore. I told him not to read so much." And she tucked me in, and no matter how I battled, it was over. No more story until the next day. I spent that whole night thinking Buttercup married Humperdinck, and it just wrecked me. How can I explain it? But the world didn't work that way. Good got attracted to good. Evil you flushed down the toilet, and that was that. But their marriage, I just couldn't make sense of it. But boy, did I work at it. First I thought that Buttercup probably had this fantastic effect on Humperdinck and turned him into a kind of Wesley. Or maybe Wesley and Humperdinck turned out to be long-lost brothers, and Humperdinck was so happy to get his brother back he said, "Look, Wesley, I didn't realize who you were when I married her, so what I'll do is I'll divorce her and you marry her, and that way we'll all be happy." Now, to this day, I don't think I was ever more creative. But it didn't take. Something was wrong, and I couldn't lose it. And suddenly there was this discontented gnawing away, and until it had a place big enough in my heart to settle in, and then it curled up and it stayed there. And it's still inside me lurking as I think about this memory. Now, the next night, when my father went back to reading, and the marriage turned out to be Buttercup's dream, I screamed, "I knew it! I knew it all along!" And my father said, "So you're happy now. It's all right now. Can we please continue?" And I said, "Go." And he did. But I wasn't happy. Now, my ears were happy, I guess. My story sense was happy. My heart, too. But in my soul, there was that severe discontent shaking its dark head. Now, all of this was never explained to me until I was in my teens, and there was this great woman who lived in Lansing, Edith Neeser, long dead now, and she wrote terrific books about how we, as parents, screw up our children. I think the titles were something like Brothers and Sisters and The Eldest Child. Anyway, if there are any parents amongst my viewers who are worried that maybe you're not being perfect parents, pick up one of Edith's books from eBay or something. Anywho, I met her at a book signing at the mall in the early 80s during a Lansing area Rubik's Cube competition. Now, I didn't know it was her at the time, but I recall this old woman, nearly at death's door, watching me tie for 10th place out of 10 contestants in my age group. And after it was all over, I remember my father saying something like, "Don't worry, Michael. It'll all work out. You'll take first place one of these days." And feeling dejected, my family took me to the bookstore near where the Rubik's Cube competition was held. And just so you know, the bookstore is my happy place. And as I browsed Edith's books on the table, she approached the table, slid behind it, and sat down. She stared at me and said, "That's not necessarily true, you know." And I said, "What are you talking about?" And that's when she took her book out of my hands and looked straight at me and said, "Life isn't fair, Michael. We tell our children that it is, but it's a terrible thing to do. It's not only a lie, it's a cruel lie. Life is not fair, and it never has been, and it's never going to be." Would you believe that? For me, right then, it was like one of those comic books where the light bulb goes on over the character's head. And I said, "It isn't!" so loud that I really startled her. "You're right, it's not fair." In fact, I was so happy that I made this realization that if I'd known how to dance, I'd have started dancing. Isn't that cool? Isn't that sweet? And I think that Edith probably thought I was well on my way to being bonkers. But it meant so much for me to have said it. And I realized right then that that was the discontent I endured the night my father stopped reading. That was the reconciliation I was trying to make and couldn't. And that's what I think this book's about. All those George Mason University experts can spiel all they want about Morgenstern's delicious satire. They're crazy. This book says life isn't fair. And I'm telling you, one and all, you better believe it. If there's anything you should take away from my ranting, kids, it's this. Don't keep expecting everything to somehow even out for us before we die. Look, I'm not about to tell you that this book has a tragic ending. Now, this is one of my favorite books in the whole world, but there's a lot of bad stuff coming up. Torture, you've already been prepared for, but there's worse. There's death coming up, and you better understand this. Some of the wrong people die. Be ready for it. This isn't Curious George uses the potty. Nobody warned me, and it was my own fault. And you'll see what I mean in a little bit. And that was my mistake. So I'm not letting it happen to you. The wrong people die, some of them, and the reason is this. Life isn't fair. Now forget all the garbage that your parents put out, and remember Morgenstern. You'll be a lot happier. Trust me. Okay. Enough. Back to the text. Nightmare time. But, oh wait, it's getting late. Sorry about that. I really shouldn't have gone off like that, with that guru on a mountaintop rant. So I'll try to tone down the commentary next time, but I've got a long day tomorrow, so we'll have to pick up Buttercup's Nightmare tomorrow night. Thanks for reading with me. Oh, and thanks for ranting with me. Have a good night. See you tomorrow.